Hey everyone, and welcome to the Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek E. Silva. Today, joining me on the Private Podcast is Bojan Simic, co founder, CEO, and CTO of HYPR, a company that is fixing the way the world logs in with true passwordless multi factor authentication. And there's a little heartwarming nugget right at the end. So now over to the conversation with Bojan Simic. Bojan, thank you so much for spending some time with us here on the private podcast today. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to do this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and I just learned it's pronounced private. It's amazing.
Yes, it is. You're not the only person to get tripped up with that. Even internally, people were saying the person who came up with the branding used to call it private, and I'm like, what isn't it private? And she was like, oh, that makes way more sense. That's a much better pronunciation. I'm like, what? Okay, sure, good stuff. Awesome. So I gave a little bit of intro off the top, but if you could tell us a little bit about hyper HYPR, would love to hear more about the company and the products you guys are building.
Of course, we are a New York City-based venture capital-backed company. Actually, we're about 8 years old now. So just last week, I believe was my 8-year anniversary since we founded the business. And really, we've been a cybersecurity company since the very get-go, and we've been focusing primarily on this problem of eliminating what's called a shared secret, which is like the term used in the security industry. But what it really means is passwords, right? And other types of shared secrets like your dog's name as a kid and the street you grew up on, things that we use today to prove ourselves on the internet that are not very secure and anybody can get from your Facebook or Instagram account.
Okay, so why hyper? Like, why go down this route? Did you have some sort of your own security scare or like identity theft or something like that that inspired you to get into this space?
Yeah, so I started out as a software engineer a long, long time ago. And one time I wrote an application, and a few months later, that application got hacked, and that got me down the
Hmm.
path of cybersecurity for a career choice. And after working in the industry for several years, we realized, or I realized, that the vast majority of the issues that I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis was because somebody used a password or a similar credential inappropriately. You know, their password was their kid's name and the year they were born, or they wrote it down, or they committed it to some source code where everybody could see it. Something like that always
Oh God.
happened,
Yeah.
and we said, okay, if we're going to eliminate these issues, let's start a company to do that.
Okay. All right. So 8 years ago, I'm thinking like there were. I'm not going to name any, other solutions out there. You can if you really want to, in your own comparison. But like, there have been. I remember doing research actually on identity and access management solutions because I worked at Infotech Research Group for a little while. Being in the industry, obviously, I know about all sorts of foundational tech that 2FA, MFA, and other similar solutions to get built on. Why do your own thing? Did you just kind of look at the market at the time and be like, there's nothing that quite matches what I think needs to get done, or what did you think you were going to do differently or better than the other solutions?
Yeah, well, when we first started out, like the gold standard in authentication for the most part was like the RSA tokens,
Hmm.
right? Like that was the most popular way of authenticating with multiple factors. And it was always a very terrible user experience. It was never, particularly great for the end user. And from a security perspective, it was a incremental benefit over the password overall. And what started happening just in the industry generally was that hackers quickly found ways to automate the bypass of those traditional controls,
Oh.
right? So what a few years ago, what used to happen was, my dad would get a phone call and they would say, "Hey, sir, this is your bank or your insurance company. We just sent you a text message to your phone. Can you please read it to us?" Right? And a lot of people would read it.
Yeah.
and this happens, thousands of times every day. But what happens now is that that entire process is fully automated. So years ago, it was a human being calling my dad. Now it's a bot, and that bot can target tens of millions of people at the same time and have pretty great results. And so it was really critical that we start this business to eliminate authentication attacks that can take advantage of individuals who are not cybersecurity experts.
Okay. All right. I think that's fair. And similar to what you're saying about, bots being used now to for these voices, I actually, running an ambassador program for a project in the space. We reviewed everybody manually, and a couple of, maybe not scammers, but well, actually, yeah, somebody tried to duplicate themselves into and get multiple spots by using this. I'm not going to name it because I'm not sure I want people to know about it, but this really creepily good and incredibly inexpensive piece of software to like make a really good video. So not only was there audio, obviously, taken from a script, so really good text to speech, but even the video was like, this is damn good. Like I know it's fake, but 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 somebody on my team was definitely fooled, or she said she didn't remember, watching it, and I'm like, this is really good. And so I went and actually figured out which software it was, and I made my own demo video and sent it to her. Like, and this person saying her name, and she's like, "Oh my god, this is this is really good in a really bad way. Like this, that's so creepy that this tech exists." And yeah, so like that's just getting easier. And I mean, there's lots of really good uses for it, like better corporate demo videos or whatever. But obviously every technology can be used to for ill will as well, and we've definitely seen that. Okay, cool. So it sounds like you're trying to improve the user experience for people who need better security. I think you guys focus on passwordless multi-factor authentication. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And what that really means is that the user is authenticating to services that they use every single day, including their workforce, resources, in a way that never requires them to ever type anything in. And that's really the most important piece, which is as long as the user has something to type in, it means that they can be tricked into providing that to someone,
Right.
which means that it's bypassable in an automated fashion.
Cool. Cool. And it looks like you also have some. I guess you're not selling direct to consumers, but you also have some consumer facing stuff as well, right?
Yeah, there's about 50 million people that authenticate every single week with Hyper,
Wow.
and they don't even know it most of the time because our software is embedded into their banking applications, their insurance applications, so on and so forth.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Looks like you got Rakuten, CVS as customers. This is not intended as an ad, obviously. I'm just I'm just looking through the website here to see, who's actually deployed Hyper solutions. That's really cool. Um, so like what is we've been going down this path for a really long time with the FIDO standard and more recently, a lot of B2C companies implementing basically like we don't like yeah we'll give you an account but we don't even want you to make a password at all. Like we're just going to send you an email, you're going to click this link, and we're going to log you in. Personally, I hate that because I want a password so that I can then enable two-factor authentication, which no is not a great UX. But when I'm capable of spending $20,000 on merch, I want that account where you could, then go back to this stored credit card or my PayPal credentials or whatever and like spend that money, to be protected with extra layers of protection. Passwordless would be ideal in a lot of situations, but I want to feel comfortable. So, like, where do you think we're heading here with an actual like passwordless life? Like, what do you think that looks like in the end? Whether you're in the workforce, in an enterprise, or for most people, shopping online.
Yeah, so, passwordless in its purest form, right, is not using any sort of shared secret to authenticate. So a lot of times when we're using an app on our phone and we're logging in with Face ID, right? The first time that you downloaded that app and used it, you typed in your password. And what it's doing is it's taking the password you typed in the first time, and when you provide your Face ID, it just sends it along. That's not really passwordless, although most of the time the user experience is passwordless. And so that's the drastic change that the FIDO standard in particular has been driving and that we've been championing for a long time.
Hmm.
And we're passwordless, for in the near future and over the next few years will primarily be something that is deployed in service areas where hackers are targeting users the most. I'm talking about financial services, insurance, payments, critical infrastructure, organizations that are getting crushed by ransomware attacks and cybersecurity attacks, and primarily institutions that have the most to lose. If I'm a hacker, I'm going to go where the money is, right? And so for me, um, those are the areas where that will be passwordless first. Your Chipotle app on your phone probably won't be, right? But your banking app for sure will be.
I have a Chipotle like 600 meters that way. I haven't been there yet. I've lived here for about 2.5 months so far, and I don't know, for some reason I haven't been. Maybe I'll go today.
It's a nice little walk.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's like probably 600 or 700 calories for like a burrito, so I'm gonna need to walk back and forth a few times to burn that off. Um, Okay, so you mentioned that there are certain industries, especially financial services and stuff like that, who are particularly vulnerable, and ultimately do have the money and the capacity to actually roll out a new solution with really good cause for it. Because I imagine this is still true today, and it was certainly true 20 years ago when I was in school. So many organizations think it's not worth the time and the money to actually implement better security, whether it's upgrading old software, what Beijing police just or some police organization in China just had like 1 billion records breached because they commented out some piece of code allegedly in their Elasticsearch implementation. It's like, guys, these are like such avoidable issues, but like that's a situation where I get maybe that's a bad, but that's a bad example just because of the way they deployed it. But like we've seen a lot of situations where somebody does get duped. Okta, it was a little bit of a ruse going on there too, but somebody was able to get in and by I think paying off an employee at Okta or a subcontractor in order to access customer records and stuff like that. But the humans are often the weak point here. It's not necessarily the hardware, the software itself. I guess like oil and gas must be coming up, especially right now, quite a bit again. Like, do you guys have any sort of experience in that area? Again, you probably can't name names just because of contracts and stuff like that. But what about energy? I guess in general.
Yeah, we have several large energy and oil and gas companies as customers, and primarily because, of course, they typically have a fair amount of money. Energy is in the news a lot lately, which always makes them a bit of a bigger target.
Yeah.
And typically, they are industries where they have very legacy systems because how often do you need to upgrade that, Windows XP computer that's controlling some, set of pumps? And so for them, they have a lot of legacy infrastructure, so they're fairly easy targets a lot of the time. And this is true for many critical, like Maersk a few years ago when they got hit
Hmm.
with ransomware.
Yeah.
Saudi Aramco got hit, really bad. So these organizations are starting to realize that they have to invest a lot more money in their cybersecurity posture and make sure that they are regularly keeping their systems up to date. being really careful about who has access to what, because it used to be just like, hey, if you've got a badge, you can do everything. And it's starting to change in a drastic way. And we've seen, in particular, the energy companies in Texas and in the South hiring a lot of cybersecurity people and some really high caliber ones.
That's good. Um, for the situations where people, for some reason, they can't justify in their minds, at least, the cost of rolling out any sort of solution, and for all I know, Hyper is like really cost competitive or incredibly affordable compared to some of the other solutions out there. At the end of the day, if you got 100,000 users or 100, 250,000 people who need access to this, it takes time, if nothing else, to roll it all out. But in the end, when you don't take any sort of measures, to help protect yourself, obviously it has or a potential impact on the company, on the economy. For especially for the organizations where they're not going through with this, or the industries where they're not following through, like what sort of impact does that have on them, and then I guess the wider economy when they do get breached.
Yeah, right now, lots of companies, when they think about their resource allocation, especially with regards to cybersecurity, they typically have 10 things they want to do in a single year. They probably have 5 things that they can actually budget. Like there's very few people that are going to a board meeting right now from a cybersecurity executive perspective and they're getting their budgets cut. Like the industry generally accepts that money needs to be spent here. The biggest bottleneck is the actual talent, right? And so with this is where products like Hyper really shine, because typically about 35% of your IT support help desk, time is spent dealing with people locked out of their account because they typed in the wrong password too many times, or they just came back from vacation and forgot it, and many of those things. So if those people were not spending the time on those frankly boring and inefficient tasks,
Yeah.
what else could they be doing to actually move along some of those other 10 things on that list? Additionally, the average cybersecurity breach from a phishing perspective can cost millions of dollars, right? So it doesn't need to happen 50 times for you to, feel it in the wallet. It needs to happen just once.
Yeah.
And typically, for a lot of businesses these days, especially if you're in critical infrastructure type of industry, your reputation matters a lot. And when you're in the news because you had records stolen, or you got hit with a ransomware attack, it matters a lot. And your competition can take advantage of it if you're one of those businesses. So reducing the likelihood of things like phishing, reducing the likelihood of being impacted by a ransomware attack, because what happens when a piece of ransomware gets installed on one of your computers in your network? It looks for a cached credential,
Yeah.
aka a password, and it uses that to spread to the rest of the network. Well, if there is no password to steal, how does that piece of ransomware spread throughout the rest of the network? It can't, right? So it's about preventative measures just as much as it is about remediation measures.
It actually makes me really sad to think that like the numbers you just put out there about how many password reset and that sort of thing people are dealing with now, 15 years ago, it's roughly the same number. How are we still
Yeah.
not any further along of like, oh, these days, across the broader spectrum of companies, it's down to 5% of help desk tickets. No, it's still like 30, 35% or something stupid like that. Oh man. It's just
Yeah, we worked with one banking customer who had 8,000 password reset calls to their IT help desk per month. And they're a large company, and they even had a self-service portal where you could reset your password, but they still had 8,000 a month. And, and so, it was just nuts the
wow.
amount of money that they were spending, because each of those costs about $30 to $40 a piece, right? And that's not including um, the the money that it costs for that person not working during that hour or two that it takes them to get back into their accounts.
Oh my God.
And so the amounts can be staggering.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it costs, there's an hourly wage assigned to the person who can't log in, obviously to the help desk person, plus all the benefits, that they might have, like whether it's health insurance or up here, paramedical insurance, retirement funds, etc. Yeah, that could easily be like 100, $150 Canadian at least, each time. That's ridiculous. like, I've got a team of 19 people who report to me, and thankfully I'm not dealing with any sort of password reset issues because ultimately they're all responsible for their own stuff. And like worst case scenario, they forget their corporate email address, and I need to go reset that. But in the last 3 years or 2+ years since I started hiring people, that hasn't happened yet. They know their password. Um, yeah, but anyway, I guess I'm hiring smart people. I guess like it's just who can manage their own um, attack surface fairly well. But I guess it's bound to happen at some point.
Or they just have really good post-it notes, that right on their desks.
No, they're all using really good open source password managers, like the one I'm using.
Okay.
And which we do talk about internally. Like somebody a couple weeks ago was like, "Hey, what? Like I'm using this password manager right now. What about the rest of you?" And like two or three of us are like, "Oh, we're all using this one." And like, "Oh, okay, cool." And I'll probably switch and get the and we're like, ah, switching is actually not that hard. There's a brief period of time where you need to export everything into plain text, and then re-import that, and then make sure you delete the file, and probably restart your device so that there's no cached version on your SSD or whatever. But but I like to think we're not super high profile targets. Every once in a while I get a we're trying to reset your Facebook password, and I'm like, oh no, you're not. But for the most part, it doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, it's interesting, and some of these, things can be life or death. I think last year or earlier this year, there was a hospital in Canada that got hit by ransomware, right? And they
Yeah,
had to basically move everything to paper, and I think they even attributed some people losing lives because of that event, because they weren't able to get the tools online to give them the proper care,
yeah,
which can be really scary. And as our world becomes more and more connected, that becomes much more of an issue, especially if we're using authentication controls that were invented in the 60s, which most of the industry is still using.
yeah, yeah. I was actually talking to a nurse. I think she's a nurse on Wednesday night about she wanted to know what a blockchain was, and so I gave her some examples of like how the tech actually works in the background, and she's like, "Oh, that sounds a lot like my hospital system. Like we can't delete people who are no longer in our care. We just have to archive them." And I'm like, "Okay, so you're basically ignoring those people now. Like that record's still there. You just don't look at it anymore," which is very much how the front end for a blockchain app would work if you're not you want to ignore the old smart contract or whatever. And and they have to sign everything. I'm like, oh, you're ready to use blockchain apps, no problem. Like you got to sign a message or you got to confirm the transaction or whatever. I'm like, yeah, this is gonna be great for you. Like if it moves if that system moves to a blockchain of any kind, I'm like, you're not even gonna notice. Like it's gonna work pretty much
Yeah.
exact. The front end at least is gonna work almost exactly what you're used to now. Where like, yeah, I'm withdrawing penicillin for this diabetes patient, and you need to sign a message that verifies that you're the person doing that or whatever. Like, you're going to be in great shape. Like you're pretty much already using or experiencing the same user experience that I go through whenever I'm putting money in a liquidity pool or something like that, or putting tokens in a liquidity pool. Uh, cool, good stuff. What what have you guys been seeing in terms of parts of the world that are experiencing the most issues right now, or maybe the most uptake? Like where are you seeing the most? On the flip side, where are you seeing the most interest right now for Hyper's tools?
I mean, it continues to be, in North America and Europe in financial services. That by far is the industry where we are seeing the most necessity for passwordless authentication because these businesses have the most money and are being targeted the most.
Yeah,
But also, for places in Asia, right? So Vietnam, Thailand, um, you know, Japan in particular, Korea, where having a mobile device is far more a part of people's lives than it is here, which is hard to believe.
Hmm.
Um, but for those people and mobile security and accessing everything through a mobile device is just second nature. So there's a lot of adoption there, even though they're typically not as targeted as much, mostly because they just want to make the user experience much easier. And for our customers, uh, the what you mentioned earlier, oil and gas energy becoming much more of a sticking point. We are starting to see more and more interest from places in the Middle East, the Nordic countries, where there are energy companies, and a lot of geothermal and general you know energy type of initiatives.
Cool. Good. Good. Um, is there any talk at this point about, uh, um, I guess, working with blockchains at all? Doesn't matter if it's permissioned, public, Ethereum virtual machine compatible or not. Like, I'm just like, what is there? Are there conversations happening in Hyper, amongst your peers as well, to either integrate or use, blockchains in any way?
Yeah, so I'm an old school crypto guy. I got involved with Bitcoin back in 2012 timeframe.
Nice.
Um, and when my wife and I first moved to New York, she got a job at a Bitcoin exchange in
Oh,
2012, which is crazy.
yeah.
But way back in the day. But blockchain for Hyper, I'm a huge proponent of the technology in general and have been for a long time. But oftentimes I think that a lot of blockchain solutions are kind of looking for a problem rather than solving a problem. And so for us, where we see the biggest fit potentially down the line is with this thing called the ADIA. It is a similar standard to FIDO,
Okay.
but it focuses on identity.
Oh, okay.
And basically, this concept of a decentralized identity is becoming much more front and center to the industry in general and potentially Hyper as well down the line. So, how do
Okay.
you make sure that you have a identity that is attributed to a blockchain and perhaps have a set of entities who have the ability to write to that blockchain that trust each other, right? Right now, if I walk into a bank, down the street at my house, down the street from my house, and I go in there, I provide my driver's license, my passport. They do a lot of identity proofing and vetting on me when I go open an account.
Right.
And then if I go to a different bank the next day across the street, they do all the same verification. It costs them the same amount of money, and it costs me the same amount of time.
Yeah.
Like there's just no reason that that should be the case. And so areas that have kind of less diverse environments in terms of their banking infrastructure have already done this to some extent. So, like the Nordic countries have their own bank ID system.
Mm.
I know Canada has been doing a similar thing with the secure key stuff
Yep.
for several years. But in North America, in the United States, there's 5,000 banks. Like that's everything from that perspective has to be done in a standards-based way that can be applied to a entire ecosystem
Right.
and not just financial services here. So I think that's the most likely way where we'll get involved potentially in blockchain type of technologies.
Um, Anybody who's listened to the show before, it's not going to come as a surprise to them that I worked with Bloom Protocol for the first 2.5 years in, you know, being full time in crypto. And so I knew about the W3C Verifiable Credentials Association or working group, I guess, the Decentralized Identity Foundation, probably one or two other ones in there. This one's new though. I haven't heard of the ADIA. I think I've got the website up here, and I'm gonna dive in a little bit and see what's going on. Even I'm not gonna name names because we can maybe have them on the show at some point. But there was a fairly new protocol working that just got a grant from Aave to also build. something like a reputation score for decentralized finance users as well, which is similar, related, not the same, obviously, but getting that on-chain data and doing something with it that is then reusable, across platforms. So it's nice to see something I was working on 4.5 years ago finally starting to come to fruition in some way.
Yeah, a lot of the guys that are in ADIA are the original people who were involved in FIDO to create that
Okay,
standard. So a very natural extension of that effort.
cool. That's great. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. Check that out later. What do you think? Like, for what's really actionable advice for somebody to take, in their day to day life or at work to help not be such a huge risk, themselves. Like, remembering your password to obviously be a nice one for the places where they haven't implemented some sort of passwordless solution yet, and stop calling the help desk or using the self service tool instead of calling the help desk every time. But like especially when it comes to potentially giving up financial information and stuff like that. What do you think? What's your actionable advice for people to take and make themselves less of a risk or put themselves at less risk?
A few things, the obvious one is don't use the same password for multiple things.
Hmm.
And if you're doing stuff like using the same password plus JP Morgan Chase or plus Royal Bank of Canada at the end of your password, that does not count. So stop doing that,
Shout out to
because
RBC.
hackers have long. Lots of people have. Well, you're in Canada, so I figured
Yeah,
I'd
I
bring that
appreciate
one
that.
up.
I appreciate that.
You got it. Scotiabank all the way. Yeah.
Oh no,
But
oh no, not Scotia. Been there, done that. I've been a customer of almost every Big Five bank, except for National Bank. I think I've done CIBC. I did BMO forever because that's where my parents were. I did TD. I did RBC. I've done CIBC. I've been all over the place. And I tried to go to a credit union last year, and they're like, "Oh, you do blockchain stuff? We can't do that." It's literally electronic funds transfers from like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America to my bank account. Like, what do you, and they're like, "No, we have all these reporting requirements, blah blah blah." I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just keep giving my money to a big bank. Like, thanks anyway. But okay, so yes, passwords, use different passwords. I guess that means, put that in tandem with a password manager you can access fairly easily. Like, I know like maybe three or four of my passwords. The one for this laptop, uh, the one for my bank account, because I hate having to go to a password manager to find it. And I think that's basically it, actually. Like, I don't. Oh, and then of course my password manager password, because that's really the end all and be all. I need that one. Um, so like, do you have a password manager like you recommend for people if they want to actually put their password somewhere that's not a post-it note or a notebook?
well, I've been using just as my password manager for well over a decade. Just one password. I always liked it.
Hmm.
Another
Which I
Canadian
think is a
company. Yeah.
yeah. I was gonna say I think that's a Canadian company too.
Yep. Yeah. So that one has been my favorite for a long time, just because I feel like it's the easiest to use.
Hmm.
And LastPass keeps getting hacked all the time, so I stopped using that one. But for
Same.
me, yeah, for me, stop using the same password everywhere is the number one thing. Because a lot of times, like, websites will get hacked or breached, and like the amount of people's bank accounts that got compromised because they use the same password for their bank account as they do their LinkedIn after the LinkedIn breach a few years ago is staggering. Like, millions of people's bank accounts got compromised because they use the same password for their LinkedIn as their financial services, and that was just
Right.
wild. Um, and the other thing is, definitely don't use same credentials for work and for personal stuff. I mean, that just puts your business
Right.
at risk in general. And if you're using any sort of service, that has MFA enabled today don't use the SMS capability. Use the Google Authenticator or OTP or whatever app if they don't support passwordless yet. You use those methods because SIM swapping is becoming easier and easier and more prevalent in general.
Hmm.
And like one of our own employees, they fell victim to a SIM swapping attack on on one of their banking applications a few years ago. And he actually
Yeah.
he has it like in the sales presentation that he gives to potential customers. He actually has a slide with a screenshot from a video recording in a bank where some guy walked into a bank with a fake ID with his name on it, and got access to his banking account. And he kind of uses that to start the
Wow.
conversation as to why it's important to stop using static credentials for identity verification.
Okay, I guess if that doesn't convince a potential customer, I don't I don't know what does. Wow, yeah, I mean that's great to have for him. It really sucks that it happened though, obviously. Okay, we are coming up to time, and I don't want to rush you out of here, so I think we're going to ask one more question. Um, Hyper has, I was looking at it. Hyper has like a multiple, great solutions for businesses who want to help secure their employees' lives, at least for the corporate side. And you mentioned earlier that you also have I guess B2B to C solutions for banking customers and stuff like that. 50 million people using your tech without probably realizing it. What can we expect to see from Hyper in the rest of the year, 2022 and into 2023? I think there's a brand new version of the FIDO standard. I imagine you guys are going to continue working with them and implementing that if you haven't already.
Yeah, of course. And so, we continue to be stewards of the FIDO standard as best we can. We've been involved there since 2014, but really the standard itself is evolving very quickly. And oftentimes when we think about passwords and shared secrets, we think about the things that we type into a browser on a regular basis. But if you go into the closet in your house where you have your router somewhere, right, there's probably a sticker on the back of it that has a code. And you're a technical person, so you probably changed it, but most people
Yeah.
don't, right? That itself is a shared secret. And so when we think about all the connected devices in our house, cameras, switches, routers, our Alexas, and so on and so forth, many of them use a password to interact with one another. And that's really one of the big problems that we're working on over the next several years is how do we eliminate the password and the shared secret, not just from the human interaction, but also the machine to machine interaction, because there's a lot more machines than there are human beings, and that's going to exponentially grow in difference over the next few years regardless. And we have to make sure that we provide technology and capabilities that are able to address some of the critical security concerns there.
Maybe you don't want to answer this question just in case you tip off a competitor. But you're talking about machine to machine, and I've been reading for a long time in Wired and Popular Science and venues like those about V to V, so that the cars can actually talk to each other and more or less coordinate, right? Like if I'm driving a Rivian, which hopefully this time next year, but probably early 2024 at this point, hopefully I will be. And there's a Tesla in front of me, and there's a Nissan Leaf to the right, and we're all in bumper to bumper traffic on the 401 near Milton because Lord knows that happens pretty much 24/7 now. Um, uh, that's obviously a potentially huge attack vector, right? Like you could cause absolute mayhem, and a terrorist could cause a lot of death if they wanted to, or at least a lot of injuries. Is that part of that machine to machine equation, like the V to V side of things? And are you guys dabbling in that at all, or stewarding the FIDO standard to also work there as well?
Yeah, that's part of it. That machine to machine applies to motor vehicles, electric vehicles. It applies to drones. right? Like if somebody can take control of drones from remotely and just, fly them into things. Like right now, there's a relatively small amount of drones in populated areas, but you can imagine a world in 10 years where you look up in the sky and there's always, 10 to 20 drones above you doing stuff. And so
Yeah.
for us,
Yeah.
make sure that those things are properly secured, at least the access to those things is critical.
Yeah. Or even this future that a lot of companies are working towards now, vertical takeoff and landing VTOL taxis, which are supposed to be, according to everybody who's making one, autonomous, right? You get in one, you tell it where you want to go, and it's basically an electric autonomous flying Uber or Lyft or whatever that's going to take you to like the next building, like or wherever whatever nearest landing pad it can get to you to your destination. I'm like again, potential, huge potential there, and that's essentially a drone, except that you're sitting in it.
Not scary at
All
all.
right,
Yeah.
well, no, not scary at all. Well, I usually try to end on a high note here, on a positive note. So like maybe you could take like 60 seconds to highlight something that's happened really good for Hyper, or maybe one of your customers this year because they had Hyper and an MFA solution, or maybe something you hope to achieve this year if you don't have any recent stories.
Yeah, one thing that's really, really cool. Recently, one of our customers came and presented at one of our events, and they're a 77,000 person company, and they have employees in about 200 countries. And
Pretty much everywhere.
many of these employees are blue collar folks that, don't are not very technical at all. And
Hmm.
because of all the complexities around multi-factor authentication prior to Hyper, password resets, all that type of stuff, a lot of those people never even bothered to access corporate resources that could ultimately help them a lot because it was just so difficult. And so when they deployed passwordless technology, it made it so much easier for people to access their corporate resources because they didn't have to worry about the resets every 90 days, so on and so forth. That for the first time, thousands of their employees are able to access things like their, health benefits online and their paycheck stubs, and they're able to access like things like online learning resources that they provide as a company, that allow them to, expand their skill set. And that's just one of those things that like oftentimes we think about cybersecurity and the benefit that we're providing there, but there's a real human benefit that can be provided in a lot of ways when you eliminate inefficiencies such as the password. And that's just one of my favorite things, that I've heard over the last few weeks, just because it's a feel good thing. And it just another thing where like the cybersecurity team at this customer says like, hey, HR is my best friend now. HR used to hate it when we would be on the same conference call because I'm usually making things more difficult for them. But now they're
Yeah,
just like, so supportive of everything that we're doing, and it's thanks to this. And it's just so cool to see.
that's an awesome win. Good for you, and really glad to hear that customer saw a very non-security related benefit to that. That's definitely not something I would normally think of, and so that's terrific. Great. It's 11 o'clock here on the call. So for people who want to learn more about you or about Viper, or sorry, Hyper, um, working with somebody named Viper for that for a hackathon next week. For about Hyper, or maybe want to see what you have to say about various topics, where should they go?
Go to hyperhypr.com. We're all over LinkedIn and other social media things, so find us there too. That's about it.
Okay, hot takes on Twitter from Bojan.
Uh, Very few these days. Funny enough, I think my Twitter account is like one of the earliest Twitter accounts. I had a friend that was like one of the first 10
Oh, really?
employees, and he was like,
Oh,
you got to create an account on this thing that I just, joined," and we did, and I just stopped using it. But I'm on there
oh, jeez.
seldom, but it's one of those things where I feel like if I'm not on it constantly, I'm out of the loop, and
Yeah.
so I've just been avoiding it.
Fair enough. All right. Well, either way, I think we ended on a positive note here. So thank you very much for coming on the private podcast, and for everybody listening or watching. Until next time, stay free.